So 2 weeks ago, we started this new series called Goals, where we are talking about New Year's resolutions and goals and us-sized goals, these little everyday type goals, and also God-sized goals. And I don't know what goals that you've set out, if you have at all, but here's the truth. Less than 25% of people are still on track with their goals. Now, I'm not talking about just in our circle here, but statistics show that of all people that create goals and New Year's resolution, there is less than 25% that are still on track with their goals. And that's because achieving our goals is a lot of hard work. It takes strength and commitment and perseverance to follow through. Now, I don't know what your goals are right now, but maybe they're spiritual or physical, maybe mental, relational. Maybe, just maybe, you have started a God-sized goal or you have a God-sized vision that you are striving for. Whatever goals that you have right now, I have good news and I have bad news. Number one, the bad news, if you have not already faced difficulty with it and opposition, you're going to. When we set out goals, frustration comes in, difficulty, opposition, things get in our way to hinder our goals. Now, the good news is that if our goals are too much to handle on our own, there is hope. There is hope found in our prayers. And so today we're going to look back at Nehemiah, and we're going to look at what he did and how he handled opposition to the God-sized goals that he had. So today we are going to recap where we've been in the series. We're going to brush through Nehemiah chapter 3 and then pick up in Nehemiah chapter 4. Now, long ago, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by an enemy army. And God promised that the Jewish people would one day return to Jerusalem. And the Jewish people began to slowly rebuild Jerusalem. And although people were living there, Nehemiah learned that the walls were falling down. His hometown, where his ancestors were from, was a city in ruins. And so Nehemiah wanted to repair the walls to honor God and to protect his people. So for months, Nehemiah, he prayed, he planned, and he prepared. He recruited people to join in this mission with him. And so once he arrived in Jerusalem, Nehemiah got to work, and he convinced tons of people living there to work together to repair the city walls. Now, quickly, we can see that Nehemiah faced opposition, and chapter 3 has maybe some boring details for you, but there's something incredible in these details. And it's that there were so many people involved that this was not a project Nehemiah could have done on his own, and it was a huge team effort. And so we see that in Nehemiah, a team effort for this God-sized goal. So if you have your Bibles today, we're going to pick up in Nehemiah chapter 4, right there at the very beginning, verse 1. And so what it says is that when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly troubled. And he ridiculed the Jews. And in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" In verse 3, Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? If even a fox climbed on it, he would break down their stones." Now talk about some bullies. Like Sanballat and his associates, they called the Jewish people and Nehemiah and his team, they called them weak, and they mocked their quality of work. They mocked their pain and their beliefs, and they tried to crush their hope. They tried to crush their spirit. And even though Nehemiah and his team were being obedient to God, they still had to deal with the haters. So let's pick back up in chapter 4, right at verse 4. It says, "Hear us, O God." This is Nehemiah's response to the haters. He lets out this prayer to God. He says, "Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight. For they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half of its height, for the people worked with all their heart. Now what we can see from Nehemiah and his team's response, yes, they dealt with the haters, but here's the thing, that there's some things that we can see in verses 4 through 6. Number one, Nehemiah didn't get distracted. He didn't fight with these guys. He didn't add to the drama. He didn't even respond to them. Number two is he took it to God. He asked God to hear his prayers and to make it right. He was asking God to fight on their behalf. And then lastly is that he just kept going. Nehemiah and his team kept building no matter what these other guys and their opposition had to say. He kept going. And he pursued and he persevered. And he said, this is a God-sized goal and I have been called to complete this project. Now, after a lot of opposition, Nehemiah and his team, they started kind of giving up and letting go of some of their hope. And these bullies, the opposition was relentless. But Nehemiah was committed and he was strategic. In verse 7, it says, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and the gaps were being closed, they were angry and they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. And the response of Nehemiah in verse 11 reminds us of his commitment. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Now Nehemiah knew that he had to take it to God. He had to continue taking it to God because he didn't have the ability all on his own. He needed God on his side to complete the task. And down in verse 14, Nehemiah tells his people, and he says, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, and your daughters, and your wives, and your homes. And so we can see four things in the remainder of this passage. Number one, I already mentioned, is that Nehemiah once again took it to God. He once again went to prayer. Next is he prioritized rest. In this passage 7 through verse 23 is he instructed his men and his workers to take some rest as well. And he chose community. Nehemiah's team was committed to protecting and supporting each other as long as their opposition lasted. So half would rest while half would work. Half would stand guard while the other half was maybe getting some water to drink. But at all times, they kept their weapons with them to protect the God-sized goal that God was calling them to. The fourth thing that we can see in verses 7 through 23 is that Nehemiah once again had to just keep on going. The job became more difficult than it was in the beginning, but Nehemiah never stopped. He kept on moving forward, adjusting the plan and getting creative in order to continue the work. Now, I wish I could tell you that Nehemiah's opposition just ended there, but it didn't. He faced even more obstacles in chapter 5 and chapter 6, both from his enemies and from his fellow Jewish people. Now, I want you to think about a time when you needed God's strength. You needed strength that just didn't come from within yourself. I remember it was about a year ago, and I was renovating our bathrooms in our house. We were living in Texas, and I had taken on the task to completely remodel our master bathroom and then mostly remodel our guest bathroom. Now, Christina will tell you this was a long project that took a lot longer than I thought it would. But I remember As I was tiling the shower, there were moments when I wanted to just give in and just pay somebody to come in and finish the job. But I knew that if I paid somebody else to finish that job for me, yeah, it might be done quick, but I would have considered my start to that project a failure because I didn't complete it myself. And that was my goal. Now, here in a little bit, I want you and your squad to talk about a time when you needed God's strength to help you complete a task. Now, hundreds of years after Nehemiah lived, we have a guy named Paul writing a letter to another guy named Timothy. And we can read it in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, when he says this: "For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and self-discipline." Now, we all know what it's like to face obstacles, and this is never more true than when we are facing or when we are chasing God-sized goals. And although God never promises that the process will be easy, here is what we are promised. We don't need to be afraid, and God's Spirit will be with us, and God will give us strength. Now, along with strength, Paul also mentions love and self-discipline too. And when God gives us God-sized goals, the challenges and the opposition we face can be a gift. Because that resistance, that opposition helps us develop strength in our faith muscles. It helps us to grow in love, and it helps us to develop grit. Now, just like Nehemiah had planned, he knew that he was going to face and experience opposition. We also should expect to face difficulties when we are pursuing God-sized goals. But here's the good news. No matter what the world and our enemy and opposition throws at us, God has given us strength. God has given us strength to pursue God-sized goals.